And joining me now is a member of Congress from Western Pennsylvania, which is probably as important of a swing geographic area as there is in the country. It's Congressman Chris Deluzio. He's from the 17th District. And for political junkies, when they think of PA 17, the first name they may come to mind is Conor Lamb. Well, Chris Deluzio replaced Conor Lamb in Congress. It is mostly that district. And in fact, I'll make that your first question, Congressman. Yeah. How much does it, that famous PA 17 race at the time was a big deal because it leaned more Republican in the teens. How much of your district is the same? How much of it's different?
When Conor first won that special election, big upset, right? He really won that seat, captured the country's attention. Pennsylvania Supreme Court drew fair maps after that. There was Republican gerrymander. So the district that he represented from really 2018 on, very similar to mine. It's maybe a point or so different. Right. All of Beaver County, about half of Allegheny County, which for any folks who know Pennsylvania, that's the county of Pittsburgh in it. So it's, I don't know, the best district in the country, if you ask me. But it's competitive. It's got a mix of everything. It's really a great part of the world.
Well, you grew up there, so you know this. There was the I don't know whether the infamous saying that James Carville once said about Pennsylvania, which is no longer true, but it used to be. He'd say, just for political purposes, Philadelphia in the east, Pittsburgh in the west, and Alabama in the middle. And the point he was making is that, as the Democrats needed to care about the two coasts of Pennsylvania. Putting coasts in plural there. But the fact of the matter is, as the Philly suburbs became more Democratic, the reason the state didn't become a lot more Democratic is that Western Pennsylvania, the Pittsburgh market, became much less Democratic. That is your childhood to adulthood. Walk me through that change. Yeah. Tell me how your community sort of swung there from there, I would argue, Reagan Democrats to Clinton Democrats to even some Obama Democrats to now Trump Republicans.
I think a big part of that story is the factory towns and the rural communities, right? In the factory towns, you drive along the rivers in my district, especially through Beaver County, the Ohio River and the Beaver. There are still great manufacturing jobs that anchor a lot of those communities. And I think as you saw those jobs go away in a lot of southwestern Pennsylvania, you saw political realignments. You saw anger and frustration at how that happened. And also where you see Democrats like me who are winning and overperforming in those kinds of communities, we're winning and overperforming in those exact types of towns. And it's the same story if you look at John Fetterman's win, Josh Shapiro's win. You look at what happened in the Senate race last year with Bob Casey and Dave McCormick. The margins in my part of Pennsylvania, in those factory towns, in the rural communities, I think made the difference. It shows in those races who can do a little better when they're even losing those counties or losing those towns to eke out a win.
Did you overperform Casey?
Yes.
Who's the McCormick Deluzio voter?
There's a state house district, Beaver County, communities like Ambridge, Aliquippa, Beaver Falls. Rob Matzie's the state rep there, and that state house district, he won it, I won it, and Dave McCormick won it. And it's an interesting story, right? And Donald Trump won that district too. And, I think if you spent time in that part of my district, I think you talk to the voters who might have voted that way, voted for me or voted for Rob Matzie and maybe voted above us Republican. Always hard to summarize, but these were folks who were fired up and angry about costs, won good jobs. I think the economic fight was front and center, and they heard from me since I ran in 2022, always an economic fight at the heart of it. Again, hard to summarize voter by voter, but they exist. And it's that part of my district really where it made the difference for me and certainly above us on the ballot.
So you operate that there are swing voters.
There are.
Not everybody agrees that there are, right? That there's two. I always say there are two types of swing voters. I do think there are voters that vacillate between party strategically, but far more often the most common swing voter is somebody that swings between voting and not voting.
So I think both things are true. And I don't want to overstate that it's just, hey, you can convince someone to vote Republican for president, Democrat for the U.S. House. It's the other thing, too. Believe me, I mean, we have work to do on turnout. And frankly, rebuilding some of the trust with younger voters. I mean, I'm 41, makes me an older millennial, right? So I guess I can't call myself a young voter anymore. We'll see. But I do think there are folks who will split ticket. I saw it in my election. I saw it with the vote drop off from presidential, right? Harris, Trump, Casey McCormick down to my race. I mean, they exist, and you got to know your district. You got to have candidates who know their districts. I come back to, I think the economic fight, not at the expense of anything else, but fighting on the economic front principally is a good way to earn those votes. And you don't have to be a whip about it. You don't have to be backtracking on anything else. I think it's the part of the path for Democrats to win more consistently in places like Western Pennsylvania.
Look, it's an 80%. Nobody likes concentrations of power, right? That's an 80%. People, recoil from too much power, too much concentration of power, government, corporations, whatever. So if you're talking about the economy in those terms, it does strike me that you can have a conversation. How much does the D next to your name make it harder? I had a couple of independent candidates. Now they're running in Idaho and South Dakota. This is not Western Pennsylvania. Okay. But they said not having the D next to their name actually was an impediment to having the conversation with some voters about the economy. Moving to an I next to their name at least opened the door to a conversation.
God bless. I mean, I'll tell you, at least, and from my part of the world, and again, like, it's different everywhere.
Right.
Some of the folks in some of those factory towns, maybe for generations, were Democrats, and they've left my party. Right. And so I'm trying to rebuild some trust and reconnect with those New Deal roots for why for 3-4 generations, your family might have been a union household. You may have been voting Democrat. At the same time, picking up and earning new votes in, say, the more suburban parts of a district like mine, right, where folks aren't as long-term Democrats who are coming into the party. Those things can be a tension, but if we can't find a way to do both of those things, we're not going to win, nor can the Republicans, by the way. That's the reality of political terrain here. And, I think for my party's brand to be seen, number one, is tougher, right? And it's not just about what's happening in Washington and being tough with Trump and his administration, as we should be, but tougher on the economic fight, which every survey I see, every conversation I have, it comes up. Folks are mad about the cost of living. I think for our party to be seen tougher there would help some of those folks you're talking about, say in Idaho, where they don't have some deep Democratic loyalty to build on to try to restore some trust. I think it helps with those guys too.
There's a reason results matter more than promises. Just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan has become America's largest injury law firm. For the last 35 years, they've recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. It includes cases where insurance companies offered next to nothing, short of shortchanging, seeing if they could get away with it. And Morgan & Morgan fought back, and they won millions. In Pennsylvania, one client was awarded $26 million. It was a staggering 40 times the amount that the insurance company originally offered. That offer, $650,000, whatever it took to sort of get away without paying. So with more than 1,000 lawyers across the country, Morgan & Morgan knows how to deliver for everyday people. So if you're injured, you're looking for a lawyer, check out forthepeople.com/ToddCast or dial pound law, pound 529 on your cell phone. And remember, all law firms are not the same. So give Morgan & Morgan a look. Their fee is free unless they win.
You've spent time in the Navy and you're a lawyer. You went to Georgetown Law School. Why'd you decide on public service?
So I was a senior in high school, 9/11 happens, and I was pursuing the Naval Academy. I mean, that day sealed it, that if I got in, I would go in. I got in pretty shortly thereafter, and I went. And it's a tough place. It's a special place. I really internalized, the mission of what we signed up to do there, which is a lifetime of service, whether that's in uniform or public service. We talk about citizenship even. And so I just believe it deeply. That's who I am. It's the part of the world I'm from. You drive down most of the streets in Western Pennsylvania, main streets, you see banners honoring veterans in a lot of communities. You walk into nearly any house in my part of the world, someone's got a picture of somebody in uniform. Like, we value that. And that's it. That's the short answer for why I'm trying to do something in public service, why I think this is a noble pursuit. And that's even before I get into the stress the country is under, what I think Donald Trump and his movement is doing. It's real. It's profound. And I think if not now, to try to step up and do something about it, when? It feels like this is the moment to try to serve. And that's what I'm trying to do in this.
So it is, it's quite a moment, right? There are times that, I know I feel powerless, but I'm not in elective office, but you're in the minority, which sometimes means you're also can be more powerless than you'd like to be. It is, every week I can put together a list of stories that says, boy, this feels like did we really just take the wrong fork in the road? How the hell are we going to get back? And then we go even further, right? How do you answer that question? What's the state of the democracy and how concerned should we be?
I am concerned. I think it's healthy and normal and sane to look around and say something's not right. And it's not just the political violence, which of course is a problem and I think a symptom of a deeper wound of the American psyche that we got to fix. And I think about, now I can criticize Donald Trump and I will, right? He's identified that wound and he offers to me snake oil, right? Division, autocracy, threats to the rule of law. Okay, let's criticize that. But then what do we have to offer that's different?
But he does identify the problems.
And I think we have to start with that. That's right.
And like, this is where I think sometimes that there are some, just because Trump has identified a problem correctly doesn't mean it's not a problem, right? Just because Trump says it's a problem, you shouldn't ignore it. And I've always said that I think the voters, when they sour on Trump, they don't sour on the problems he's identified, they sour on his solutions.
So I'm 41, and we can look at this data pretty quickly. If you're my age or younger, you're now the first Americans since at least the Second World War who don't expect to be better off than your parents. Yeah. That is a failure of our government across parties, across decades.
Yeah, that's multiple presidents. Yeah,
bingo.
That. Yeah.
And you should be mad about that. I'm mad about that. If you're younger than me, you're even angrier about it because the prospects look worse. And so we have to confront that. That goes to the fundamental trust or distrust in our government, right? If you're going to work hard and follow the rules and you still can't afford your life, you are mad. And maybe you don't trust the way our governments work. So to me, I think battling corruption, rebuilding trust, putting muscle back in the American dream, those things are all linked. It's part of why the anti-corruption fight matters so much to me. It's part of why this vision of economic patriotism I and others are talking about matters. It's putting muscle and something real back into the American dream. Because if we're going to just pay lip service to trying to restore trust without fixing the problem underlying our system, it's not going to work in my book.
How do you feel about the redistricting wars? I say this because, look, your state's not going to do it. There's a variety of reasons for that. There's just, I think the legislature's too split. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't. I know that a lot of your colleagues in Congress don't like what's happening, including Texas Republicans and California Democrats, but that they feel like pawns in a larger fight, because guess what? You're pawns in a larger fight, But I look at how the Democrats are fighting this, and simultaneously, you've got Pete Buttigieg going to Indiana saying, please don't do this. And then you've got Democrats raising money so that Gavin Newsom can win a proposition, which, like, I at least you get the voters, you're including the voters in the say-so here because they have to. But that feels like such a mixed message that I it is really hard to get my arms around. If you're upset about disenfranchising voters in Texas, how is the answer disenfranchising voters in other states?
Yeah. Let's start with, here's what I would like to see, which we just have a federal ban on partisan gerrymandering, and we have federal standard for fair maps. That was in what was, I don't know, the For the People Act or HR1 before I got to the Congress.
Some of that was in there. There was also a lot of partisan stuff, which
Sure.
made it less of a serious bill. Unfortunately, I mean, look, I'm for somebody that says you have messaging bills and you have bills you want to get passed. That was a bill for messaging, not necessarily to
Let's do a federal anti-gerrymandering thing and just take this off. Like it's out of the playbook for either party. While it's not the standard, until that happens, I'm not interested in Democrats fighting with like a wet spaghetti noodle while the Republicans are carrying a bazooka. Like this is control of Congress, and how they write a map and say Indiana and Texas affects what happens to my constituents. Same reason why I've been endorsing some folks in competitive districts in Pennsylvania, because those members of Congress are taking votes that hurt my constituents. So I don't want Democrats to be fighting limply while Republicans are taking seats all over the country. And I would start and end with, let's just get rid of this as a tool for either party and just have a federal standard. I think that's where this has to go. And I think, look, I also think this goes to that distrust in government problem. When politicians are writing their own maps, when they're picking their districts, when they're carving little communities, and all that matters is a competitive primary, I don't think you get great representation.
But you understand, look, you understand the issue of when you sort of compromise your principle for, and again, like, I get it, right? I understand the rationale, and I get all of that. It just doesn't feel like a long-term way to win trust back. That's what makes it so such a flawed way to fight back. Because I also think I think that what Texas did is not going to be as effective as they think it is, right? The unintended consequences always bite you on this stuff, and that's why I'm thinking the fight, quote unquote, fighting fire with fire is like, be careful out there. You don't know what you've opened up.
No, and look, when you draw these things with aggressive gerrymanders, I think you're alluding to this fact. You make some of those seats potentially gettable, especially if it's a big wave election, the other direction, right? And so that's a part of this. That's a risk they're going to have to take on, because I hope and expect we might have a good year next year, and that could go a very different way.
So speaking of ways to do confrontation with Trump, we could sit here and debate shutdown, no shutdown. I sort of understand, hey, when you've got leverage, use it, right? That's sort of part of the process. That's what politics is about. It does feel like the timing now is, when do you use it, right? Is this 6-week CR the hill to die on, or do you let this one go and you fight the fight in November? Where's your mindset on this?
Look, number one, nobody wants a shutdown. Let's just start with that. And much like the last funding fight, my counterparts in the Senate have much more leverage than we do in the House, and they should use it. Right. They use it to protect the American people. They use it for good. They use it to fund the government responsibly. But they have a filibuster. We don't have that in the House. And I've long felt like the Republicans have full control of our government. You know this, House, Senate, White House. If they want our votes, they should do something to work with us. But I don't have to go along with saying yes to rescinding funding. I don't just go along with saying yes to using the bully pulpit of the White House to suppress speech and to shut down critical voices in the media. I don't have to do any of those things. And so I think there's a path here. They can decide to work with Democrats responsibly, or they can do it on their own because they have enough power to do it. And if they shut the government down, it falls on them. It's not going to fall on the House minority Democrats who aren't saying yes with a crazy spending plan.
No, I get that. I mean, I just guess just tactically, and again, I know I'm a little weeds this year, but it's like, I might let the 6-week CR happen clean. Hey, you want 6 more weeks to talk? Fine, we'll give you 6 more weeks to negotiate, but you're not getting another extension. Like, I go there because
I see
the shoe's literally been on the other foot on that. Hey, we need 6 more weeks to negotiate. Can we buy that while we get through this? It's one of those where you're like, that's what I mean is, do you die? You got to pick. I get the battle's going to happen. The question is, when do you want the battle to happen?
Well, look, if there's any real effort to work with us to have some kind of negotiation, great, let's do that. I haven't seen any of that. And so I think, to your point, if it's about buying time to work something out responsible, okay, I think you'd actually have support for it. I haven't seen any of that yet. I mean, maybe what I heard today Is there some interest from the White House in meeting with Leader Jeffries and Schumer? You know, we're now a week out from the end of the fiscal year.
One of the Democratic senator from Pennsylvania has already indicated he's going to vote to keep the government open pretty much no matter what. And you know, Fetterman, it's been interesting. I interviewed him for my I guess it's been about 5 or 6 months now. And his mindset was, look, we've got one North Star. It's the 7 swing states. Whatever it takes to get a majority in the 7 swing state ought to be the focus of the party. See, I get that. That's an interesting North Star. That's what you'd want the head of the party to say. He's been shifted on that. What do you make of it? And do you where are you with his he doesn't want to shut down the government mindset?
Yeah, me neither. And yet I wouldn't vote for a shutdown bill that repealed the Civil Rights Act or, you know, made national right to work or some national abortion ban. Like, of course not. Right? We can do a basic level of analysis and have some basic values that we're not going to compromise. And so I don't think it's that complicated. We can say and support funding the government and also say there are lines I'm not going to cross. Maybe we balance those and put those in different places. I guess we do. But I don't really get the argument that there is no circumstances ever where I wouldn't vote against a very partisan, bad spending bill from the Republicans.
You were on the ballot with Fetterman in 22. Did you believe he was to your left or to your right?
You know, it's funny. I don't really think about him or maybe even Josh Shapiro, right? Like our Pennsylvania Democrats in that way. I don't think we're so obviously in a certain orientation in the party. And certainly now things are different. But like I think there has been a scrambling of the old centrist, progressive, whatever lanes of the Democratic Party. I think there's a very different orientation now about your willingness to be a fighter. I don't just mean about Trump. I mean on this economic fight against, say, it's monopoly power, against corruption. I think we're reorienting in that way. And I like it because I see colleagues of mine who might wear different labels, who are all in with me on a fight against, say, corrupt congressional stock trading, or who are with me about fighting against monopolies. I mean, I did this Monopoly Busters caucus with colleagues like Pat Ryan, Pramila Jayapal, Maggie Goodlander, right? It's an interesting re-scrambling of those old labels of, you know, different.
Well, it's been interesting. Like,
Party.
you know, during the 2022 primary, Conor Lamb was the supposed centrist and John Fetterman was the supposed progressive, right?
Yeah.
Is that how that primary would look today?
It's a great question. I don't know. You know,
right?
And I think,
no,
and
I don't
think
either.
And much of our conversation up to this point has been about the style of what a Democrat in Washington is in the opposition, in the minority.
Yeah.
And so it's a very different posture of going back to 22 when I first ran. Democrats had the White House and we're still riding in the House with some control. And so it's a very different posture. And again, I don't think the current, if there are fissures, it's not so much about progressive lane, centrist lane, moderate, whatever. I think it's now much more about whether you're fighting and on what grounds you're fighting more than it is, are you going to support this, that, or the other piece of legislation, and what kind of label Democrats that make you?
No, it's an interesting thesis. I don't disagree with it, that there is sort of a little bit more. This is no longer about size of government issues and government spending issues, that it really is more of how should the power of government be used?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I agree. And I think, look, you have Donald Trump trying to take what has become a very powerful imperial presidency and put it on steroids, and a question of what the heck do you do to stop that and to protect the Constitution, to assert the Congress's role, to assert the court's role. I don't think that lends itself to a progressive, liberal, moderate, centrist, whatever kind of lens. It's a question of how do you be effective in shoring up our Constitution.
I had a friend of mine who might have called himself a progressive, say 3 or 4 years ago, who said, I want my own Donald Trump. And I said, what do you mean? Well, I want somebody in there with strength, right? Getting into this strong versus weak argument, who's willing to accumulate and use power. And I get it, but there's this fine line, right? There's no doubt Donald Trump does not believe in small government. He believes in strong government through his lens. It tells me we are likely to have a political, I'm a believer in political physics, an equal and opposite reaction. So we are probably going to have somebody from the other side of the ideological spectrum also pursue a more robust use of government. Can you do it without it coming across as borderline authoritarian?
Well, number one, I sure hope that's the case. And look, I think there will be different political party in power in Washington. There will be a Democratic
It's inevitable,
president.
right?
There will be a Democratic
Congress.
Congress.
Right.
And I think whomever that president is should use their power to shore up the government, to shore up trust in government. Like I talked about the economic fight and why that undercuts trust. They also should be clear about where there's been overstepping and overreach, where this president or any other has been able to expose the weak spots in our system that just relied on norms or just relied on behavior.
Well, our
Maybe
law
we should do
enforcement
something about
agencies,
that.
like I look at the FBI and the Department of Justice right now, and they couldn't be totally untrustworthy. And, but I'm not going to sit here and say you automatically restore trust by simply electing the other party. How do you build in a safeguard so that the next Trump isn't able to weaponize the Justice Department, right? What do you do? Do we change the status? Like there's a, does the Justice Department get treated more like the Federal Reserve? Although we're about to find out whether the Federal Reserve has any independence left. Right. But in theory, right, the Federal Reserve, a little bit different as far as is supposedly the Supreme Court has claimed it will be treating it differently, more independent than as part of the executive branch. Is that the model of that we ought to be taking with law enforcement, considering once you lose trust in that, you've lost the democracy?
Yeah. And frankly, not just, I think you identify and diagnose a real problem, but it also is about, well, the person who sits atop that law enforcement system, are they willing to call for prosecution of their enemies to rip up those norms? And so we can't, my point is, we can't be at the whim of what's in the heart of whoever happens to be the president. And that to me is about structural change. We got to have reform so that whether you got a good or bad guy or gal at the White House, it doesn't matter. They don't have the tools to abuse something as basic as
look at this story. Look at this story that circulated over the weekend about Tom Homan and cash. Right. This was an investigation taking place during Christopher Wray's FBI, and now it's Kash Patel's FBI, and they just shut it down. They don't. By the way, what's amazing about this story is they don't deny it happened. It is. There's no denial of the facts of the story. There's just simply, well, we're not going to prosecute. There's nothing to prosecute. And by the way, in fairness, bribery cases are a high bar. They if you can't find the quo and the quid pro quo, it is certainly difficult. I assume the IRS will have a little something to say about Mr. Homan's extra income from the Kava takeout. But when you look at a story like that and you realize Christopher Wray managed the FBI one way and Kash Patel, who put out a joint statement with the president's former personal attorney, who somehow got confirmed to be a deputy attorney general. I mean, it's laughable if it wasn't so serious.
Yeah. Well, and to me, again, I think it's a symptom of we now have a person who is willing to look around and say, wow, I have all this power, I can abuse it, and there aren't formal guardrails in place to stop it. So to me, that just goes to we have to have better structure, better reform. There's not some single silver bullet I can explain to you on this podcast of how we do that. But to me, we can't just hope there's a better or different person. You got to put real limits on their power in place, no matter which party has the White House in the future.
Well, let's talk about an entity that you have some familiarity with, being somebody who served in the Navy. It feels like there's an attempt to politicize the military right now in ways that we've never seen. Go into it. I mean, I think about, I've already heard, I think there are parts of this that don't get enough reporting, including what's happening at war colleges, what's happening to academia at the Naval Academy, at West Point. But tell me what you understand is happening.
There is a real attempt here. And I think one of the opening salvos of that, you mentioned the Naval Academy, where I'm a graduate. I'm on the board there now. And there was an attempt to take...
You're still on the board?
I'm
they
still on the
taken
board.
You out?
There's a congressional slate and there are presidential appointees. So there are Democrats from the congressional slate on the board.
That Trump couldn't just
he can't remove us.
And Hegseth can't remove you either. Okay.
Correct. And so there was an attempt to take books out of the library. This is it's a proving ground and a training place for future Navy Marine Corps officers. It's also an academic institution. There are faculty who do research. And so that's just one little piece of a bigger problem. I saw the president at the West Point commissioning wearing a MAGA hat. He was in front of the troops down in North Carolina. There was merch being sold, as I understand it, campaign merch, talking about his political rivals in front of the troops, just stuff that would seem beyond the pale, and yet is happening, all against the backdrop of these efforts to, I think, politicize the curriculum at West Point, Annapolis, Air Force Academy, to make changes to the senior flag and general officers, seemingly around their political views. And that's just a part of it. And so I think it's a problem. I think it's a big problem. And I come from, again, I was an officer. I commissioned out of the Naval Academy. The culture we learned was apolitical. You don't ever give any appearance of that kind of bias in uniform, because you serve the civilian leadership, whichever party that might be, right? The secretary up through the president. Yeah. And I think this effort to inject political and partisan loyalty, it's dangerous. And it to me, just again, goes to eroding trust in the military as an institution that's going to serve the civilian leadership who we elect in this country.
It's interesting to me. I don't think the timing of this attempt by the Pentagon to stifle press coverage, it literally came 2 days after the Wall Street Journal reported that there were lawyers at the Pentagon nervous that nobody was taking their legal concerns seriously regarding what could be extrajudicial killings that are taking place in the Caribbean Sea. If there is what I would call legal dissent, and you have legal basically members of the military legal team saying, hey, this is of questionable and how is it going to get out? How are we going to get this information out there if we know that our civilian or our political leaders are essentially ignoring the legal advice they're being given about whether what they're doing is legal or not?
I think part of that answer, or part of my answer, gets to the importance of congressional oversight. Mm-hmm. And look, I'm on the Armed Services Committee. Damn. We don't have subpoena power as Democrats in the minority. I expect we're going to win.
Is your chair at all? Is the chair of Armed Services at all interested in at least finding out what authority is being used here to just bomb ships that the president claims are filled with narco-terrorists?
I hope so, because I can tell you my Democratic colleagues do. I suspect some of my Republican colleagues do. I'd like them to put some muscle behind that.
Rand Paul seems concerned. For what it's worth.
And say he's a voice in the Senate who's actually spoken up here. Yes, and look, I'm a veteran of the war in Iraq, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a veteran of a war that I don't think we should have fought, but at least the Congress, for crying out loud, debated and had an authorization.
He went to the UN and he went to Congress. Like, we can debate, was the intelligence manipulated or wrong, right? Was it purposely wrong or it just was wrong? We could have that debate, but the separation of powers was respected.
And that's my point. And look, I think, and I convey this in private, I'll say it to you here. My Republican counterparts right now, right, they're enjoying full control of Washington. That's not going to last forever. And you ought to have some respect for Congress's power, the people's power, against a president, no matter what party they're in, who is overstepping their authority. And I think something like war powers is one of those places. We've seen presidents for a long time abuse this. Congress ought to assert much more power here and go back to the Constitution, which says it is the Congress and the American people who decide whether we go and start a war or send Americans to fight.
I was thinking about, you came in 22, and so you have no memory. You're not part of the institution that was And frankly, it's really been about 20 years since the House knew how to be bipartisan, where committee chairs and ranking members there was some coordination in some form or another. There's probably slightly more left in the Senate just because some of those senators have been there a little bit longer. The House is a little more new. But how have you gone about trying to find Republican colleagues to work with, and what works best?
It's a great question. So I'll give you two pieces of this. Mm-hmm. One is a very direct way I try. I'm in this caucus, for country caucus. It's veterans of both parties. We mostly can find places to work together on defense, maybe some veterans issues. Mm-hmm. And so that's a real effort to try to find.
Has that gotten harder with
it has.
Yeah,
it has gotten harder, and it's gotten harder to be candid with Donald Trump as president and the threat that he always has over Republicans if they may lose a primary. And look, the other and maybe more productive, not more productive, but a way that I've seen some success, my district right on the border with Ohio, right on the border with East Palestine, we had people in the evacuation zone of that horrible derailment. We have people in Beaver County who lived through that fireball. So I've been in the rail safety fight since that happened. I've found some Republicans to stand with me in that. Mike Ruley, the Republican member from East Palestine, is one of my co-leads. J.D. Vance was before he was the vice president. And so where I got to find partners to do something that's right, I do it. It doesn't always work. I'm not naive about the moment we're in. I'm frankly a little less interested in trying to convince my Republican counterparts to come to my point of view, and a little more interested in winning power and taking gavels out of their hands and after the election next year. But we always got to try to find some ways, and I get it. And you're right, though, at the beginning of the question. I've never served in a Congress that was something like I've heard about. That's just not the Congress I served in.
The good old days, whatever the hell that means. No. All I know is that when I was younger, they kept telling me about the good old days, and it turns out I was in the good old days. But what did I know? And yet the 90s were seen as the most divisive era we'd ever had in politics. My God.
If they should come take a look.
Yeah. If only we could have that's how it felt in the 90s, because that was compared to the 80s, right? It's always about, what are you comparing it to right now? The good old days of Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton seem like small potatoes. Well, the reason I was setting you up on that, to be honest, is I thought that the one area where I feel like there is real bipartisan interest in doing something about this concentration of power is in tech, specifically with social media and kids. Now, I don't know why you can't get people, if we know this product's terrible for kids, why should we assume it's not terrible for adults? But one step at a time, if we can get everybody agreeing this is a human brain experiment that should no longer be used on our children, then maybe over time we'll convince them that, this digital smoking is bad for you no matter what age you are. But there does seem to be real possibilities here on kids and sort of getting at the big tech algorithm issue and all these things through the abuse of our children.
It has been a rare place. I mean, when you've got Kathy Hochul and Sarah Huckabee Sanders down in Arkansas, both signing similar
Marsha Blackburn and Brian Schatz in the Senate, right? Yeah.
So it's a place, I see it in my own district around smartphones in schools. I sent a survey out to all my school districts just to see what they're doing. I asked a public survey about banning smartphones from classrooms, and it was like an 80-20 response. So it seems to be a place where it hasn't fallen down on the typical partisan line. Parents are very worried about what's going on with the kids. I'm a dad. I got young kids. Believe me, I'm worried. Right. And so maybe it's the one place we still have where we can find something to do to protect these kids. And it hasn't become the usual sorting of D versus R. I think there's real anger at the big tech companies. I think not just parents, people know this stuff is designed to be addictive.
Right.
You're talking about like teenage and preteen brains. Those kids are vulnerable. And I think politicians are just catching up to really how frustrated, especially the parents are, if you got to do something to protect these kids.
No, and it feels like once we get everybody focused on that, then we're all going to say, hey, wait a minute.
What about everybody else?
What about everybody else? Yeah. And then, of course, like we also have this huge constant, and that's the other part of this. And this is where, I had a conversation with Steve Bannon, who said, who was a big fan of Lena Khan. And he said something that was frankly a very agreeable statement. He goes, I'm always nervous about too much concentration of power.
Me too.
Right? And I'm like, me too. Right. And he goes, I'm focused on government and media. And I'm like, okay, except look what we're doing in tech. Look what we've done with crypto. And I've got my questions about it as it is. But what we are doing is we're concentrating a small group of people to control. I mean, look at media now. It is all Donald Trump's friends who are owning a piece of TikTok. You're now going to have potentially two families control Fox, CBS, and CNN, right? If the Ellisons go through with both CBS and an acquisition of Warner Brothers, that's a huge concentration of power, which I don't understand where the small C conservatives are on this.
Well, and I think, look, in this moment, especially where you're seeing a president and his allies willing to stifle dissent and use the power they have to kick people off TV, right? The problem of concentration of power is related to this. If you've got a diffuse competitive market, it's a lot harder to bully a very competitive market versus just a handful of corporations who you have hanging over their head the threat of blocking a merger, for instance, right? Finding some use of government power you can use to get action that you want somewhere else. The competition would make that a lot harder to do. Right. And by the way, it might be better for a variety of viewpoints. It might be better to have different content creators and different sports and TV and news platforms. It might be better for consumers. And so I think these things are linked. I think the economic fight, and for me, I very much include that concentration of power, right? That Lena Khan and others were part of in the Biden administration, that it seemed, at least at the beginning, there might be some carryover into this administration. That now seems to be happening. I think that fight is really important, and it goes to beating back any attempts to weaken free speech and weaken the Constitution. I think they are very, very linked.
Well, this gets into, and I'm curious how you answer this question, because I'm sure you've had a constituent when you bring up this corruption issue. And I'm like, I am just alarmed at the level of pay to play that we have right now. And I'll bring that up and I'll have somebody say, well, they're all kind of corrupt. And you're like, yeah, but like, this goes to 11, doing I'm sorry for the Gen X reference there to Spinal Tap, but it is, I hear you. I know. I just, you're talking like a middle-aged guy, and I'm like, yeah, I'm a decade plus older than you. God love us. But what do you say to that? Because I really do think the biggest problem we've got is with the public is they agree that what's happening is bad, but they sit there and say hey man, I thought the last guy was somewhat corrupt too. You may not have thought he was as corrupt as I did, but it certainly didn't look that much better. And all of these people get rich off of politics, whether it's liberals or conservatives. And the thing is that even I could say, well, it's lopsided. It's like when everybody wants to have this fight over who's extremists or more violent. It doesn't matter if if everybody's got violent actors on their side. You need to police it. But how do we break this sort of that cynical, well, they're all corrupt. So I even had people say, yeah, I know Trump's corrupt, but at least he's authentic about it.
So I'll give you an example on congressional stock trading. Okay. I've had constituents at town hall or senior center event, and I'll bring it up or they'll bring it up. And they might think I'm going to get you because I'm going to name some Democrat who abused this. And my answer is, I don't care. No one should be doing this. Let's ban the damn thing. And it's an easy anti-corruption thing that we should do. And yet I think it's one example of many of this stuff that just breeds distrust for people, right? When you see politicians do this, people know it's gross. They're not dumb. People are smart. They know that when politicians get rich doing this stuff, it's crooked. And I could cite the same stuff about the abuse of the meme coins and everything else in the administration. Sure. But I think the congressional stock trading really hits for people. And you got to be willing to just say, I don't care who's doing this. It's wrong. You just need that. And I think it seems like a low-hanging fruit of something we could take on and just do right now. And that we ought to do. And frankly, there has been movement finally of some legislation that you've got Dems and Republicans both on. We should just do this stuff. I mean, it's no.
I have a crazy notion here. What if you combine the congressional stock ban with a pay raise?
Oh gosh, to get enough.
I say this.
Yeah.
Look, I know that it's about. Look, you know, I'm one of these people who at least understands the life you live, and like, you know. If you don't want members of Congress to interact with each other, then make them sleep in their own offices and make them not. If you do want them to interact, then you better pay them a decent salary so they can maybe have their family in Washington. And if you move your family to Washington, you're more likely to get to know people across the aisle than if you don't. You end up. I mean, look, I could sit here and talk myself in circles about what's better or worse, but if I've been empathetic to one argument about the congressional stock ban is if you're a middle-class person who's had a decent job, got a 401k, what are you supposed to do once you get there and you get it? But hey, I'm trying to plan for retirement too. And it isn't a very, you know, I know it sounds like a lot of money that you make, and it is to a lot of people. But what I always say is great. Try having 2 households on that $172,000 a year salary. That's hard.
Yeah, no one's gonna feel bad for us, and you know that. And like, look, to the point on.
I know I'm like baiting you. I don't mean to bait you, like to make you cover. But I do think that it is not the easiest lifestyle for a member of Congress, and yet they take so much. There's this perception that life is so easy.
Well, look, even let's do the retirement example you talk about. You could just have ETFs or mutual funds, and you aren't trading individual companies, which I think is such an obvious red flag given the kind of.
And we saw this during the pandemic where, wow, Richard Burr made a whole bunch of trades literally an hour after he got the word about what was coming with the pandemic. Like, yeah, that was bad.
So I'm not going to cry tears for, you know, that.
Totally get that.
And look, at the end of the day, this is public service. It's a great honor to get to do this job. It is a public trust. And I think it's one of those things that if the members who won't support a ban were to look themselves in the mirror and ask, like, is this good for public trust in our government? They would say, of course not. Or they're deluding themselves. I don't get it. I just think it's an obvious one. And your point's well taken, but man, we ought to just.
Well, here's the problem I'm trying to solve for. Is I want a working class person to be able to
100%.
To be able to be a member of Congress. And the way it all works now is you really need to be wealthy in order to be an effective member of the House. And that shouldn't be how it works.
I agree. And that's a real problem. And part of it is, look, when we've got candidates, and the Republicans will have their own version of this with the NRCC and all the rest, but, you know, it's part of it is trying to give candidates who come from a working class background a shot to run. I'm supporting Bob Brooks running in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania as a firefighter. You know, that's not the norm for folks who end up being in Congress. And
it's a lot of lawyers. No offense to your JD, but like, in fact, that is a lion's share of the Democrats that are in the House are lawyers, right?
Yeah. No, I get it. And look, like at the end of the day, we're lawmaking. That helps a little bit, but man, you got to have different perspectives. It can't just be one thing. And I think it's a really good question, and what we do about it is not an easy answer, but a part of it has to be folks helping when we've got good candidates who come from a working class background, getting some support and help, because man, the fundraising reality of getting elected to Congress is obscene. We can spend an hour talking about campaign finance reform, but it's not an easy thing. And I think we would do better as a Congress, as a country, if we had people who came from far more normal jobs and careers.
I want to get you out of here on 2 more questions. One's politics, and one will be easy because it should be easy because it's sports. But on the politics front, it seems like every Democratic strategist out there, and no matter the flavor that they may be ideologically, all is agreeing on the same thing, which is, hey, Democrats need to drop the culture stuff and just focus on economics and sort of day-to-day things. It's easy to say, but it's turned out to be really difficult in practice, hasn't it?
I guess that here's what I'll say. And look, I talk about my own experience running and winning, and I've never backtracked on people's civil rights. And, you know, my part of the world is very competitive. It used to be, you know, a lot of the old blue dog Dems in my part of the world who were anti-abortion.
I was just going to say a lot of pro-life Democrats
Yeah.
have represented Western Pennsylvania in the
Sure.
past. I want to say Mike Doyle was. I don't remember for sure, but I feel like that was the case. But not a.
Well, I guess where I'm going is I have put this economic fight front and center, and I've also been clear I don't have to backtrack on anybody's freedom to do that. And I've been talking about it on the stump and at rallies. As much as Donald Trump might want to divide people, right? Some trans person wanting dignity is not why your housing or your health care is a ripoff. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to fall for that. I don't think the path to Democrats rebuilding trust is now throwing people under the bus. And by the way, the other side of this, the Republicans ought to be careful, because not only are they hurting people, they're spending a lot of time worrying about inspecting kids' genitals on sports fields when they are failing to bring down the cost of living. And that is, I think, them failing at their core task and spending way too much time picking on kids and what sports they're going to play.
In your community, what is the one big economic issue that you think is about to just explode that, will, like, people aren't realizing in about 3 to 6 months, X is going to happen?
People's energy bills have already been going up, and they're mad about it. And that's on top of healthcare getting more and more expensive.
Is there a good explanation on energy? What's happening here? Because this doesn't feel like an easy answer.
Look, it's a mix of things. It's a mix. I've been working with congressional research to get really dug in on what's going on in my part of the country, PJM.
But it's across the board. I don't know if you saw the New Jersey governor's race. Both candidates are, hey, we're going to try to fight for you. You're like, yeah, when you see both candidates doing something, you're like, oh, this is everywhere. Trust me. I mean, my wife and I had this discussion.
Yeah.
Have we always paid this much? You're like, no, this is really a new spike. Yeah, there's something happening out here.
You've got a problem with not enough power generation, period. No matter the source of power, that's a real problem. And, you also got a mix of the traditional co-ops, but you've got these investor-owned or private-owned utilities that seem to be jacking up prices at higher rates than the old co-ops, if you've got that in your part of the world. And I think it's a power generation problem. It's the monopolies. They're all monopolies, essentially, on the transmission distribution side. Some of those investor-owned companies there. There's not an easy answer, but man, I think people are mad about it. And I think the Republican big, beautiful bill just made it worse. And we're going to see, as those tax credits go away for things like getting new power, new transmission going, that's going to make bills go up.
I'm old enough to remember when the Republican stance on energy was all of the above. And suddenly it's no longer all of the above. It's whatever. President Trump likes oil and gas. He likes nuclear. He's okay with solar. He doesn't like wind. And you're like, what does it matter? Don't we want all of it?
Tell you what, you talk to people in the building trades in Western Pennsylvania, they would just like jobs. And any energy work, those can be good jobs.
Are you going to go to the, I assume you're a beloved Pittsburgh Steelers fan?
I am.
I think when this will air before Pittsburgh's going to Ireland, right?
Dublin this coming Sunday, I think. Yeah.
That's got to be a tempting field trip. No,
I'm not going. I'm staying home. I'll watch from afar. It's going to be like an early game on Sunday as a result.
Well, the Rooneys. I mean, I just think what a right. Papa Rooney was the ambassador. I mean, that's going to be. I mean, I have a feeling that's going to be a Pittsburgh home game.
Something tells me the Steelers will travel well. Our fan base is everywhere, and I'm gonna guess we got good fans in Dublin.
Yeah. How you holding up with the Aaron Rodgers experience? I'm a
weird,
Packers fan. I know this world well.
He's older than me, I'm pretty sure, which is bizarre.
You guys are about the same age. I think that's right. Yeah.
The New England win. So we're recording this Monday after we just beat the Patriots. It was kind of an ugly game.
Better to win than lose.
Better to win than lose.
He is. And then, of course, there's the Pittsburgh Pirates. Why does an incredible franchise with its history like that? I say this, I come from Miami. We didn't have baseball when I was growing up. I moved to Washington. It didn't have baseball. It now has the Nats. I feel like Pittsburgh's just a worse version than what Miami and Washington have experienced, which is owners that just either don't have the resources or don't spend the resources.
I think it's a simple question of whether you're going to spend or invest in the team. I mean, look, we play in a beautiful ballpark. You got a fan base who will show up.
A magnetic ballpark, meaning people will travel. You hear it all the time. Like there's a whole baseball community that loves to do the ballpark traveling. I mean, in fact, my son is one of them. He's one of the few 18-year-olds that actually likes baseball. As he says, he's in college and he goes, yeah, I wanted to go check out a Rangers game. He's down in Texas and he had a hard time recruiting people to go check out a baseball game. Like, that's how badly baseball is not penetrating Gen Z. But he loves to see all the parks, and PNC Park is always right at the top of the list. PNC, Colorado, after Wrigley and Fenway, PNC, Colorado, and Camden. Those three are just fantastic.
Well, and we haven't even gotten to the fact that we have the best pitching.
Yeah, he's so great.
I mean, Paul Skeens is unbelievable.
Yeah. He's going to be terrific for the New York Yankees one day.
And, it kills me to know that we are probably not going to be able to keep this guy. And, I look at it from his perspective. You want to win, and you want an ownership that wants to win. I mean, we should be
pitchers. We know this. What's your career lifespan, right? Like, you only have a finite amount of time before your arm falls off.
I know. I wish. Look, I want to build a team around this guy. I want us to compete and win. I mean, we have this guy who's such a generational talent, and I don't know.
Are the Pirates owners good community citizens? I mean, do they invest in the community or not really?
I think if you went to a game, what you would see is banners and T-shirts that tell them to sell the team. And that tells you about what the public sees here. Look, they want a winner. If these guys would spend and invest, people would come around this ownership. I think it's a simple lesson. And you see it with, we talked about the Rooneys and the Steelers. They invest. They spend to win. They have a culture of winning. The Buccos could do this with a little bit of money.
One last question. If you go through the various suburban communities on a college football Saturday, are there going to be more Penn State flags or Pitt Panther flags?
Well, I'm a Pitt fan through and through, so we're going with Pitt. But there are Penn State folks out here.
It's pretty 50-50, isn't it? Is it?
Well, and they're also West Virginia fans. We're not that far from Morgantown.
Right. So you got a little bit of that too, huh?
Yeah, it's a mix.
All right. Congressman, it was great to get to know you. Appreciate the time.
Chuck, thanks for having me on.